You walk into a store and see a $200 bottle of wine sitting next to a $50 bottle. The 50 suddenly feels like a bargain, a responsible choice, almost a steal. But if the shelf had shown you a $25 bottle first, that same $50 would have felt like an indulgence. Same bottle, same store, same owner. The only thing that changed was the number that showed up first. That number quietly took control of your judgment, and it does this to you dozens of times a day. It raises the rent you think is fair, inflates the salary you ask for, and makes a perfectly ordinary price look like a gift. This effect is called anchoring, and because it works in every currency, every language, and almost every context, understanding it might be the cheapest self-defense you will ever learn. Anchoring is the reason a real estate agent who shows you a house above your budget first can make the next house, the one under budget, feel like the obvious choice. It is the reason a restaurant prints a $9 glass of wine on the front page and a $15 glass on the last page, so the middle options seem moderate. It is the reason you come away from a negotiation feeling clever about a price that you never would have accepted if someone else had spoken the first number. You are not stupid. You are not careless. You are simply measuring everything against a starting point that appeared before you had time to think, and you have no idea how far that starting point is pulling you. The classic explanation is insufficient adjustment. When you hear a number, your brain latches onto it and starts moving in the direction you think is correct. If someone says the average rent in a neighborhood is $2,000, you adjust downward if you think it should be less, or upward if you think it should be more. But here is the catch. You stop adjusting the moment you reach an answer that feels plausible enough. Plausible enough is not the same as accurate. It just means the number no longer feels ridiculous. The anchor does not disappear when you correct for it. It keeps a firm grip on the edge of your range, so your final answer almost always stays closer to the anchor than it should. The most famous demonstration of this was built by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in the 1970s. They spun a wheel of fortune in front of participants, only the wheel was rigged to stop at either 10 or 65. Then they asked two questions. First, was the percentage of African nations in the United Nations higher or lower than that number? Second, what is your exact estimate? People who saw the wheel stop at 10 guessed around 25%. People who saw it stop at 65 guessed around 45. The wheel was obviously random. It had nothing to do with the question, yet it moved the average estimate by 20 percentage points. And when participants were asked later, most of them denied that the wheel had influenced them at all. There is a second mechanism underneath that first one, and it is just as sneaky. An anchor does not only give you a starting point, it also primes your memory for information that fits it. If I ask you whether a house in your city is worth more than $2 million, your mind starts summoning luxury properties, penthouses, views, and famous addresses. If I instead ask whether it is worth more than $200,000, your mind pulls up starter homes, fixer-uppers, and nearby listings with cracked driveways. You are not comparing the house to the entire market. You are comparing it to whatever your memory served up because of the number I gave you. In a sense, the anchor edits your evidence before you ever get a chance to weigh it. This matters because anchoring does not fade with expertise. In a study of real estate appraisals, professionals given a suggested price for a property produced valuations that were pulled toward that suggestion. This was true even though the appraisers insisted that their estimates were based on comparable sales and careful analysis. A similar pattern shows up in courtrooms, where researchers have found that the length of a sentence can shift based on a number mentioned in passing by a lawyer or a judge. It shows up in medicine, where a patient's previous diagnosis can anchor a doctor's thinking so strongly that new symptoms are read as evidence for the old conclusion. Expertise does not protect you. It mostly gives you more confidence in a judgment that has already been bent. You see this effect in ordinary shopping aisles, far from any laboratory. A clearance tag that reads, was $80, now $49, makes the lower price feel like a reward, even if the product never once sold for $80. The $80 never existed in the store's history. It existed only as an idea in your head, and that idea did all the work. The same trick runs through subscription pricing, where a monthly plan is shown next to an annual plan, so the monthly rate feels cheap by contrast, and through restaurant menus, where a $100 steak makes a $60 chicken dish look reasonable. The first number you see reframes every number after it, and the frame is invisible to you. Social decisions are just as vulnerable. A donation form can suggest $50, and suddenly your $25 contribution feels stingy, even though $25 is a generous gift. A payment screen can offer suggested tips of 18, 20, and 22%, and 20% feels like the neutral middle, even though tipping itself was once a gesture of gratitude, not a default option. These numbers are not moral truths. They are anchors placed by someone who knows that your sense of fairness is calibrated by whatever appears first. The effect is so reliable that entire industries are built on it, and you have been following those numbers your whole life without realizing they were doing the steering. But here is an important limit. Anchoring is not always a mistake. If that $200 bottle of wine is from a rare vintage, or if a $9 glass is made from grapes that were picked by hand, then the first number carries real information. In those cases, starting from the price and adjusting feels rational because the price is telling you something about the product. The problem is that your brain cannot cleanly separate the informative part of the anchor from the purely arbitrary part. You process both the same way. A genuinely meaningful number and a completely random number take the same neural path and both tug on your judgment. That is what makes anchoring so difficult to defeat. You cannot tell which anchors deserve your attention because they all feel equally convincing. Another limit is that some people are more susceptible than others, but predicting who is nearly impossible. Studies have found anchoring in students, in managers, in judges, in financial analysts, and even in car mechanics asked to estimate repair costs. Telling people about anchoring before the experiment reduces its power a little, but it does not eliminate it. The effect has been reproduced hundreds of times, with prices, weights, ages, distances, and stock values. The direction of the shift is always the same. The first number wins, even when you know the game is rigged. You have probably experienced the most personal version of this in salary negotiations. Imagine you are offered a new job, and the employer names a starting salary of $45,000. You negotiate, you push, you feel proud when you land at $50,000. Now imagine the employer had opened at $55,000 and your negotiation settled at $58,000. Same job, same skills, same company. The difference is not your bargaining talent. The difference is the anchor that was laid down in the first sentence. Researchers have found exactly this pattern in field studies, where starting offers predict final outcomes far more strongly than any objective measure of the candidate's value. The first number is not just a proposal. It is a gravitational field. There is another version of this effect that should worry you more. In a famous experiment, people wrote down the last 2 digits of their social security number. Then they bid on items like wine, chocolate, and wireless keyboards. The people whose digits were high, say 85, bid roughly 2 to 3 times as much as people whose digits were low, say 15. The number came from their own identity. It had nothing to do with the products, and yet it changed what they were willing to pay. As if that was not uncomfortable enough, the high-digit bidders later reported enjoying the wine and chocolate more. Once they had committed to a higher price, their brains reinterpreted the product as better, so the anchor did not just change their spending. It changed the actual experience of taste and pleasure. That is the deepest part of this psychological trap. An anchor does not just alter your estimate, it alters your preference. When you buy something because a higher price made it feel like a better product, you are not merely overpaying. You are rewriting your own memory of how much you enjoyed it. This is why saying, "just ignore the first number," rarely works. You cannot ignore a number that has already reshaped your perception. The wine really does taste better when you paid more, at least to the brain that is drinking it. The damage is not only to your wallet, it is to the accuracy of your own inner experience. So what can you actually do about it? The most effective trick is to build a counteranchor before you form your own judgment. When you look at a price, a salary offer, or a suggested donation, stop for a second and ask yourself what you would have guessed if you had never seen that number. Write it down. Say it out loud. Mentally place a much lower and a much higher anchor on either side of the offer and see how far your opinion moves between them. If your assessment of the deal shifts dramatically based on the starting point, you are being anchored, and the number that appeared first has no claim to your trust. You can also seek out someone else's estimate before you commit to your own, because another person's number is a different anchor, and competing anchors cancel each other out better than you might expect. There is no neutral place to stand. As soon as you think of any number at all, even a number you invented, it becomes an anchor. The goal is not to become entirely immune, because that is not possible for a human brain. The goal is to hold your anchor lightly, to treat it as a piece of information with a specific origin story, not as a pull on your judgment. Ask where that number came from. Was it set by a seller who wants to maximize profit, by a negotiator who spoke first, by a label printed months ago, or by pure chance? Once you know the origin, you can discount the anchor instead of obeying it. The $200 wine bottle did not make the $50 bottle a bargain. It just made it feel like one. Every day, dozens of first numbers are waiting to take control of your decisions, from the sale tag to the suggested tip to the opening offer. You cannot stop them from appearing, and you cannot stop them from tugging. But you can choose which number goes first, and you can ask where it came from. And that moment of asking is the difference between making a decision and having one quietly made for you. The first number may win. It does not have to be the one that speaks first.